Hello, it's Book Quote Wednesday and the word is drive. Today I am reading from HMS Barabbas, first in the further adventures of Jim Hawkins. Jim has very reluctantly found his niche on board HMS Barabbas as captain's steward and doctor's assistant. But not even those two positions mean he is out of danger, especially as he is also guardian of the ship's medicine store. The sick bay was dark and lonely. Jim's only company was the sound of Dr. Willoquet's snores rattling through the slats of the dispensary door. He yawned and rubbed his stinging eyes, then leaned closer to read the book by the light of the sick bay lantern. As the doctor had predicted, his new duties were light. However, they gave him a chance to observe Willoquet at work. Jim could learn from a master at his trade, study from his books, and be baffled by his new mentor's determined drive to alcoholic self-destruction. An especially loud, spluttering snore disturbed his concentration. He shot the closed door a look through narrow eyes. Sometimes he could almost pray that the Lord should provide a steady stream of sick men. When Dr. Willoquet had a patient, the drink seemed to evaporate from his blood, and he was as dedicated and competent as Dr. Livesey at his best. The moment he had done what he could for the sufferer, the drink came back. Jim forced the puzzle from his mind and went back to the book. It had been a long day. Most of it had been spent chasing down a ship that refused to respond to Barabbas's signals. The vessel had been spotted soon after first light. It had interrupted the captain's breakfast, which immediately put Hans into a bad mood. Jim was learning to recognise the signs. The more irritated the captain was feeling, the calmer he became. It was a very measured and precise Malachi Hans who came up to the quarter-deck, observed the ship through his telescope for a few moments, and gave orders to intercept. A fact of life at sea was that while you could see all the way to the horizon, even the swiftest ship rarely travelled faster than a man could run. If your ship made 5 knots, the one you were after only 4, then sooner or later your ship would catch up, but later was much more likely. In this case, the other ship hove to after a warning shot from Barabbas's bow chasers when the frigate finally came within range in the late afternoon. It turned out to be completely innocent, his papers all in order. The problem had been a curmudgeonly captain who didn't like the Royal Navy and saw no reason to do as he was told until Barabbas opened fire. Captain Hans confiscated part of his cargo, mostly out of irritation, so far as Jim could tell, and sent the ship on its way. But now, past 3 bells of the first watch, the sun had gone down and half the crew in their hammocks, Jim finally had time to do what he wanted to be doing. Dr. Willoquet had loaned him an illustrated manual of human anatomy. The drawings were done in colour by hand and were actual renditions of autopsies done on human bodies. They were annotated in Latin, but the doctor had scribbled English translations in the margins. Jim was piecing together what he remembered of the operation on Toby, tying it in with the illustrations in front of him. With a stab of guilt, he thought that perhaps he should have kept Toby's arm for reference. The flap of skin that the doctor had made had been from the deltoid muscle, a pad of fibre that covered the shoulder and the upper arm like the captain's epaulets. The artery he had pressed down on was... Jim's eyes were closing, his fingers slipped from the page, and a sailor stumbled through the curtains from the mess deck. Jim jumped in his chair and the book flopped shut. "Mr. Driscoll, you startled me. How's the tooth?" The sailor in the doorway grinned a mirthless smile. He was hugging himself, his hands running up and down his arms. "The tooth? Yeah, the tooth." One of the hands went to his jaw, the right-hand side, though the tooth which Dr. Willoquet had pulled out with a pair of iron forceps from the back of the mouth, while Jim held Driscoll down on the sick-bay table, had been on the left. The tooth had been black and almost hollow. "Hurting." Driscoll moved his hand round to his left jaw. "Hurting terrible. I need some more of that stuff." "Well, it can't be hurting that badly. We took it out." "Don't you!" Driscoll snapped and pulled himself together with visible effort. He stepped further into the room. In daylight his grey would have been grey and sweating. In the lantern light it was positively corpse-like. "I know where I'm hurting. Just give me more of that stuff the doctor gave me and I'll be fine." "The stuff was laudanum and I'm not authorised to give it." Jim shot a glance at the dispensary. Of all the times for the doctor to be insensible. "Laudanum," the doctor had said, holding the jar up for Jim to see. It was a rusty-coloured syrup with a bitter smell. "Looks and tastes like old blood, but it's a wonder for killing pain. Comes from poppies. Problem is, it kills pain too well. If you get too much into you, then your body starts making up pains to make you take more. Be very careful who you give this stuff to, laddie." "Look!" Driscoll shouted. He fumbled at his belt and his fingers came away with a small leather pouch that jingled when he slammed it onto the table. "I'll pay. Here's the money." "I'm not taking money." "But I've paid. It's here. You have to take it." Jim began to climb to his feet, slowly, not wanting to provoke the man. "I do not have to." Driscoll lunged for the dispensary door. Jim was the wrong side of the table, and it took a few precious seconds to get around it, but Driscoll in his agitation was still fumbling at the door handle when Jim got to him. Jim wrapped his arms around the larger man's chest and tried to drag him away. Driscoll bellowed and flailed his arms, breaking Jim's hold. Jim grabbed hold of him again. Driscoll roared and staggered backwards so that they banged together into the table. Jim was pinned down by Driscoll's weight, and Driscoll used his elbows to pound backwards at Jim's ribs. Jim gritted his teeth against the blows and held on. The man subsided for a moment, and Jim dared to hope the fight had gone out of him. With a renewed surge of effort and another roar, Driscoll lunged forward across the sickbay, dragging Jim after him. Jim tried to pull the man back, but his feet only scrabbled on the deck. Driscoll reached the box where Willoquet kept his surgical instruments, and he scrabbled at the lock. Then the box was open, and Driscoll was brandishing a gleaming, pointed blade. He jabbed back with it, and Jim was forced to let go as he danced backwards, a bare inch away from the pointed steel. Driscoll advanced across the sickbay, teeth bared and knife held in front of him. Jim retreated slowly and wondered if it was a good sign that Driscoll seemed to have dispensed with his first intention of acquiring laudanum. It was a shame that his new objective seemed to be to stick a knife into Jim Hawkins. "Driscoll, shut up!" The sickbay was too small to keep retreating in one direction. Jim had bumped into the wall, and now he had to back around the operating table. Driscoll lunged, and Jim danced backwards again. He couldn't keep doing that forever. Before Driscoll could lunge again, Jim picked up the one chair in the room and held it in front of him. It was not much of a weapon, but it would deflect the knife. A rumble at the back of Driscoll's throat peaked in a bellow as he attacked. It came as the rumble turned into a shout. Driscoll grabbed the chair with one hand and pulled it to one side so that his knife hand had a clear shot at Jim. Jim let the chair drop so that he had two hands to grip Driscoll's arm and keep the knife from going into him. Driscoll screamed pure hatred. Jim lunged forward, intending to drive Driscoll out of the sickbay. Driscoll's knife arm bent across his chest as Jim slammed into him. Driscoll tripped over the dropped chair, and they came down together onto the deck with Jim's weight on top. Driscoll shouted, this time in pain. Jim quickly pushed himself back up and off the fallen sailor. The man lay flat on his back for a moment, groaning. Jim looked about quickly for the knife and realized it was sticking out of Driscoll's shoulder. Red blood began to stain the canvas shirt. Jim stared at the knife, at the blood, at Driscoll's sweaty, contorted face. What did he do now? Did he offer to bandage the man who had been trying to attack him? Then Driscoll stirred and grunted and strained to sit up. He scrabbled at the hilt of the knife, and Jim's heart sank as two more sailors burst through the curtains. Should he just hand over the laudanum? He pointed at the dispensary. "It's in..." But they ignored him. One of them grunted, "Oh, Robert, wrong move." They moved quickly to pick up their friend. One plucked the knife from Driscoll's shoulder and laid it on the table with a nod at Jim. Then they hoisted Driscoll up by the shoulders to hang between them. "We'll look after him now. Don't bother the doctor." I should." Jim glanced at the locker where the bandages were kept. I should probably..." "I said we'll look after him." And they were gone. Remember, you can buy my books at www.benjeeps.com. See you next time.